she's currently the executive director. Before coming into that position, she taught Spanish, and she is a fluent Spanish speaker. And as a result, she's also very interested in the history of Spanish-speaking people who came to Saranac Lake to cure from TB. She currently lives in Saranac Lake with her husband Roger and her 2 sons. And we're also going to hear from Mary Hotelling, who is one of the founders of Historic Saranac Lake. And she also helped found the Adirondack Architectural Heritage Society. She has a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Vermont. And she is the author of a book about Edward Livingston Trudeau called A Rare Romance in Medicine, The Life and Legacy of Edward Livingston Trudeau. She lives in Saranac Lake with her husband, Jim Hotelling, who's also well known as an architect in other capacities. So Mary is going to start off, so please welcome Mary and Amy.
First, to make sure you can hear me.
Okay. Oh, good. All right. Okay. Well, this is a reprise of a talk I gave here in 1991 in this very room. It's shortened. This is only, I'm going to talk about the Cure Porches and their development. It was given at an annual meeting of Historic Saranac Lake that year. It's called The Building for the Outdoor Life, Porch Development in Saranac Lake. Can you all see the screen? Am I in the way of you? Some of you? Well, I guess I can stand. I'm going to have to run back and forth. Okay. The story of Cure Porches began at Dr. E.L. Trudeau's Adirondack Cottage Sanitarium. He wrote, "As the sanitarium was from the first an experiment and had no precedent in this country for its guidance, its growth and development have naturally been along the lines of a gradual evolution. The architects William Scopes and Maurice Fustman seconded that idea when in 1935 they published an article titled Evolution of Sanatorium Construction in the Journal of the Outdoor Life. It's that experimentation and evolution that I will be talking about here. So the first picture we have is Little Red. I expect you all know that. Oops. I expect you all know this. This is the first little patient cottage at the sanatorium. The use of porches for the treatment of tuberculosis began at his sanatorium with the earliest cottages in 1885. Dr. Trudeau wrote, "This first cottage consisted of one room, 14 by 18, and a little porch so small that only one patient could sit out at a time, and with difficulty." And I bet many of you have visited Little Red, and if you haven't, Historic Saranac Lake gives tours there. So you can see Amy about that at some other time. At this time, all porches were for ambulatory patients to sit out on during the day and get the benefit of the fresh mountain air, so much cleaner than the air of the cities most patients came from. The porches they sat out on were ordinary verandas, like those anywhere else in America where the Queen Anne house was in style. So, here's the Stevenson Cottage, which I expect you all know. Robert, this is one of these pretty early verandas where patients sat out. He came in 1887. And the Linwood Cottage, which was downtown where Newberry's or Sears or I don't know what the latest incarnation is of the parking lot is, but it was on the back part of that parking lot, and the whole part where we park was their lawn. So curing on porches of private cottages was going on in the village at the same time it was developing the sanatorium. Here, early patients are sitting in straight chairs with blankets on their knees. I don't know if you can see that, right along their blankets, and their maybe rockers sometimes. The Adirondack recliner was unknown in those early days. That is what we all know as a cure chair. The first infirmary at the sanatorium for bedridden patients was the Hall Memorial Cottage, opened in 1892 or 93. The exterior, someone wrote about this at the time, the exterior had never been attractive, the open verandas a failure in stormy weather. It was a deck, it was open, and there are pictures of these patients sitting there. covered up with, hats, coats, blankets. The first patient, this is a good story, was Charles Armstrong, who broke his leg bobsledding. That's what patients could do in those days. This was the first unintentional test of the rest cure. When he got up 20 weeks later, his lungs as well as his leg were healed, while standing up for the picture. This building is photographed very often by patients, so there are pictures of it all over the place. The next picture is Inslee Cottage, also at the sanatorium. And it's very typical of the first, or probably the second version, second level of patient cottages. It's a one-story, they're all one-story cottages, these 4 patient cottages, and with porches all around for patients to sit out on. But at this time, they weren't sleeping out yet. The treatment in general consisted in keeping the patient outdoors as much as possible in all kinds of weather. The patients took the cure by sitting in a porch-type rocker or chair, wrapped in a blanket with feet in a soapbox with a heated soapstone at the bottom. This, of course, in the coldest weather. Sitting out during all the daylight hours was rather rugged during extreme winter temperatures, as there were no windscreens or shelters then. Ladd Cottage, one of the biggest of the 4 patient cottages, the fanciest really, was built about 1900. In the years prior to 1900, it was realized that curing on the porches entailed considerable discomfort, but little was done toward improvement other than to make the porches more spacious. When Dr. Lawson Brown arrived as resident physician at Trudeau in 1900, he wanted to provide more comfort for the patient out of doors, so that the patient would enjoy living on his porch in all kinds of weather. The porches of the early cottages were small and had no protection from the wind other than the protection provided by the cottage walls. Built-in window sashes as windbreaks were found desirable, and these were installed on some of the porches at Trudeau. The depth of the porch was increased as additional cottages were built. By 1901, the sanatorium was buying Adirondack recliners, which we all know about, which Dr. Brown designed. Downtown, sitting-out porches began to be added to business buildings. Here they are. Here are patients in what we now know as care chairs, and which replaced the previous versions. Okay, Hogan Block downtown, where the Artist Guild is now. You see? Okay. This building used to have another layer of porches, like this one. And this one is the Blue Duquette building downtown with its full panoply of porches. And then, so in these particular business buildings, just makes a pretty unique situation, have downtown curing as well as in cottages and at the sanatorium. And here they are with rental rooms for patients upstairs above their businesses. And then the patients would be ambulatory and would walk out to those. You sort of were curing on your own in these. Gradually, these open porches were adapted to make the experience more comfortable for patients by protecting the porch with low walls and windward sides with glass panes. These began to be designed to match the distinctive windows in the rest of the house in some of the fancier cure cottages in the private homes. So the windows were built right in and designed to match, rather than, as Phil figured out, added porches. He classified them in his cure cottage book in 3 different ways, which I will let you tell people later. One principal development in the technology of the cure, which occurred at the sanitarium, was its advocacy of the medical idea of sleeping out. Now, this was a whole new breakthrough. Dr. Trudeau wrote, as early as 1849, when consumptives made their overland journey to California in prairie schooners, more or less thorough sleeping out was an inevitable part of their treatment. An old buffalo hunter said that if they lived 2 months on the trail, they either died or got quite well. Which was no doubt a very correct observation of the results of this particular method of sleeping out. Since then, sleeping out has been more or less advocated by the Western physicians, since that 1849 or thereabouts. But the Eastern physicians were first brought into this by Dr. C.S. Millett of Brockton, Massachusetts. He was the first in the Eastern climate to practice this method. He advised mill workers when confined indoors most of the day to build sleeping out porches on their homes. Since then, wrote Dr. Trudeau, outdoors sleeping out has steadily come more and more into general use in the open-air treatment of tuberculosis. In Saranac Lake, the architectural adaptations for sleeping out were developed by resident patient architects working closely with doctor scientists. The first of these architects was William Coulter, a patient himself, who came here in 1896. He built this house for himself. You can't see the whole thing, but you're getting a glimpse of it there. And behind his head is a place where he would shortly add his own cure porch. Okay, and you can see that his porch is up here. I met his youngest, I was lucky to meet his youngest daughter many years ago now, before she died, and she told me about that. She remembered her father, and she said she thought her brothers used to tease her that she was born on that porch.
Where was that, Mary?
No, that house is still there. That's on, Shepherd Avenue. It's Dr. Neil Miller's house. So there are a number of houses. I think they're mostly all extant, the ones I have pictures of. In Saranac Lake, the architectural adaptations for sleeping out were developed. Oh, I told you that, sorry. After sleeping porches came into vogue, he added this one. And he built a number of others on Upper Park Avenue here for some of his other clients. Okay, this one, perhaps you know, Park Avenue. This is, well, was built for a man named Creasy, who was a partner of Coulter's in some business dealings. He was a patient, and he died rather shortly, but you probably know it maybe as Lorison Brown's house or Edward Packard's cottage. Built about 1900. This seems to be the first originally built sleeping porch on a private home. In this case, one Coulter designed for, in 1900. Houses on Upper Park Avenue, called Highland Park, were for the very wealthy who wanted the latest style. And in Saranac Lake, the latest style was sleeping out. Coulter was experimenting here. Creasy's sleeping porch was built into a corner with two open sides here, as well as the sitting out porch down below. There are several here that are on Park Avenue. Okay, this is the back of the big house on Park Avenue. You will recognize it better from the front, but here's the open porch in a very early photo, of open sleeping porch, but look what's going to happen when it rains. Not a good idea. This was called an outdoor, in the plans it was called an outdoor bedroom. It was built for a woman named Agnes McIntosh, and it was later modified for more protection from the weather. But there's also an excellent sitting out porch down there. And there's another little sleeping porch, or sitting porch on the front, above the front door. Here the next one. Okay, and also in the same neighborhood, the Duryea Cottage, another partner of Coulter's. Here the architect departed from the gambrel roof form he had used on the rest of the house. You can see it right here, that shape. In favor of a simple gable with ventilation on three sides, and I believe this is because the health requirements of cross ventilation were more important than consistency of design. Up at the sanatorium, the patient cottages at Trudeau expressed both functionally and stylishly the evolving medical development of outdoor sleeping, and they influenced residential design across the United States throughout the first half of the 20th century. In 1901, Coulter designed Child's Infirmary at the sanatorium, the first building erected in any sanatorium with rooms and porches arranged for outdoor sleeping. William Stokes and Maurice Fusman wrote that, and they'd come along a bit later. They're also architects. They were critical of Coulter's blanketing of rooms by porches, which made the rooms extremely dark, uncomfortable, and poorly ventilated. Incidentally, Child's Infirmary was not for children. That was the name of the donor. And here's what it looked like on one of the porches inside, and you can see Dr. Lorison Brown was experimenting with ideas, and he suggested skylights along here. You can see them just probably covered with snow. He suggested putting skylights over the beds on the porches. These skylights were not a success. They were torn out and replaced by the usual ceiling within a few months. One example of the evolution of the cure porch. Next was Richardson Cottage was being built at the time when idea was being developed, and he described how, Scopes and Huseman described how the development of outdoor sleeping affected buildings. Such good results appeared to be obtained, and the outdoor sleeping seemed to be enjoyed so much that immediately steps were taken to make it possible to wheel beds direct from rooms to porches. Richardson Cottage was being built at Trudeau in 1902. Work had gone too far to make the needed changes so that each patient could be wheeled directly from a room to the porch. The difficulty was overcome by making the bedroom and main entrance doors wide enough to wheel a bed through. After this, no cottage was built at Trudeau or any patient housing provided without arrangements for direct access to a porch from the patient rooms. A couple of examples of these later cottages are Phoenix, and there were two almost identical, Phoenix and Robbins. All of these that I'm showing you that were at the sanatorium are either changed greatly or torn down. So these are, Phoenix is still there, Robbins is still there, which is its double, but their porches are all enclosed. When outdoor sleeping began to be prescribed around 1901, a porch directly connected to each bedroom became standard, and sleeping porches were added to all the cottages as money was available. The almost identical Phoenix and Robbins cottages were planned so that the beds may at will be pushed directly out on an open veranda, thus enabling the patients to continue the open-air treatment, even when confined to bed, and to sleep out at night on the sheltered veranda during the milder seasons, or when thought advisable. And here's what the plan looked like. So you're looking, here's the front door, big veranda here, but doors from each of these bedrooms so that you can sleep out here. Sitting room, fireplace, bathroom, closets, two more bedrooms, and they have their own little veranda in the back. This, either Phoenix or Robbins, I'm not sure which one this is. They're identical. From 1894 to 1904, the patient cottages changed, Dr. Trudeau wrote, from small, cheap, temporary structures to larger, permanently built little homes, equipped with electricity, open fireplaces, bathrooms, and sleeping out porches for every patient. The adaptations at the sanatorium quickly influenced residential construction. Many cottages had been rented by patients in Saranac Lake Village, hardly any of which were provided with sleeping porches prior to 1900. After 1900, it was almost impossible for a house owner to rent his cottage unless it had one or more sleeping porches. Some of the physical features of sleeping porches are sliding or rolling window sashes. This is not such a good picture of the sashes, but I thought you would enjoy seeing Marshall McClintock, who was a writer. Here he is typing in bed, and what's that in his mouth? Cigarettes. But he also has, there's these big sliding windows there. The other features, besides sliding windows, which many of our houses have, are sashes that go up into the wall. I know of one house that does it. Both sashes go all the way up into the wall. There are call bells or little square holes in the wall where the call bells used to be on porches so that you could call for help. Awnings, wide stair landings with room to carry stretchers up and down. Until Mary Prescott opened her reception cottage in April of 1901, there were no special facilities for patients who were confined to bed. It was only afterward that some private cottages in the village became nursing cottages. After that, there were two types, ambulatory or up cottages and nursing cottages for the bedridden. So there were two types of sleeping porches, those for ambulatory patients who could walk out to their porches and who may even have been working during the day and curing at night, and those for bedridden patients whose beds were pushed out onto their porches day and night. You can tell the difference if you live in one of these houses by examining the doorway and the floor, looking for evidence and adaptations that would make it possible to push a bed through. Wide doors or double doors, doorways without thresholds or steps, scratches on door frames from beds being wheeled in and out. Most patients at the sanatorium up to this time were ambulatory. Most cottages there were one-story buildings, so the porches there were all-in-one veranda sleeping porches. Here cottages in town were self-contained houses, so there might be both sitting out veranda downstairs and a sleeping porch or porches upstairs. This was all covered in the national press in various ways. There we go. I don't know if you can read that from where you are, but this is an article in a magazine called Country Life in America, and it's It's called Sleeping Outdoors for Health, a phase of modern living that science demands and that is bound to become universal. It showed literally dozens of ways that an open-air sleeping facility could be added or adapted to ordinary houses. Similar articles appeared in other magazines, such as House Beautiful in 1905, Good Housekeeping 1907, Craftsman Homes 1909, Bungalows, Camps and Mountain Homes 1915, Boys Life and Scientific Monthly 1917, Popular Science 1920. Sleeping porches worked their way into literature too. Even Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt slept out. The architecture of Reception Hospital, now known as Prescott House, for 20 patients was influenced by planning and design of the sanatorium. The architects learned that for all practical purposes, as much segregation of patients could be obtained in a large building as in the small 4-patient units at Trudeau. The plan of many institutions throughout the U.S. and Canada was influenced by the success of the Reception Hospital idea. In Saranac Lake, porches continued to be added to cottages as the money was available. Now, this is Schiff Cottage at Sand, which is no longer there. But this was built in 1893, and this is before. You see porch down below, windows up above. And afterward, well, let me say, around in 1911, patients who occupied the second floor of Schiff Cottage protested their need of sleeping porches by taking their cure upon the lawn, much to Trudeau's amusement, sort of a sit-in. Trudeau wrote Jacob Schiff, who sent a check to keep cottage up to date. The upper story was rebuilt to keep up with the sleeping out ideas, and so now those 3 windows there's some kind of a more open porch here, and they've added something here between these 2 dormers. And that's happened, that adaptation happens other places in town, and keep your eyes open for it. Around 1902 or 03, there was great demand for space for TB patients, particularly the poor, far in excess of capacity. Tents were used, and a few of what were called shacks were built, at least one at the sanatorium and a few in the village. These were essentially freestanding cure porches. And here's one of those. This is a Pomeroy Cottage on Baker Street. And I think that one may still be there. There used to also be one up at the sanatorium. Oops. That's that one off. There used to be one at the sanatorium, which I think has since been torn down. But now Amy Catania will tell you about the cure porch on wheels that Historic Saranac Lake is building. Thank you.
I'm actually wondering if I can do without this, because it's sort of echoing. Yes. You guys hear me okay back there? Okay. I don't like these if they don't work right. Okay. Great. So thank you, Mary, I was so glad to have Mary come in and do that piece of things, because she's the person who knows all this stuff. So I knew I would learn some stuff, and I did. So now I want to take that script and put it on our wiki site or something so we can all get to it. So I'm going to take the history that Mary talked about and sort of bring it into the present day and the future, because we have a project at Historic Saranac Lake. You may have heard me talking about this or seen it in the papers and stuff, but I want to tell you a little bit more about it. This is the Cure Porch on Wheels project. And I just want to give you a little bit of a background about it, how it came to be. You know, especially I think talking about it in the context of what Mary just described, I think it kind of helps people understand why we're doing this crazy thing. Like, why build a cure porch on wheels? People say, what, you know, only Saranac Lake can understand that. And really only people who understand the history can understand what we're talking about. So now that we have a little bit more of an idea of the importance of the cure porch in our town, in the architecture of Saranac Lake. I mean, I think when Historic Saranac Lake first formed, they did a survey of all the properties. How many houses were identified?
Oh,
like hundreds.
Oh, yeah. Close to 2,200 structures.
Wow. So 1,500 of the buildings in the area were identified as places where people took the fresh air cure. No.
They were dwellings.
Were dwellings.
Yeah, and when we were doing the research for the Historic Register, there were hundreds, I don't remember how many
Hundreds.
hundreds, but
Okay.
we came up with 187.
Yep. And now we have listed on the National Register of Historic Places 230 properties, and one of those listings is this Trudeau Sanatorium, which includes many, many buildings. So, you know, hundreds and hundreds of places where people took the fresh air cure. Many of our houses still have those porches, and it's a really rare thing. It makes our town unique. It's a big part of our history. It's something that people are still very connected to. We're actually taping this presentation today, I hope it turns out in some sort of way, to send to a woman who lives in California. Her grandmother cured here, and her grandmother wants to see this presentation. So it's still a big part of our history and has inspired this crazy project. So, whoops, wrong way. So how did we start to think about this Cure Porch on Wheels? Well, back about 7 years ago, I went to a conference. The Adirondack North Country Association has an annual conference, and they had one down at Camp Sagamore. And those sorts of conferences, you drive a long way, you spend the whole day, and you kind of hope that you come back with one good idea. You know, it's like, you know, you're going to get one good thing. And I was sitting there sort of thinking of my long to-do list, and I watched this presentation, and it was a person from a place called Salem Artworks, and this is this artist colony in Salem, New York, which is like a dairy community about 2-3 hours from here. And he presented about, the theme of the conference was like community connections and doing projects that bring people and communities together. And he presented this project, he presented this. So this was called Porch Pieces, and this was a project where a woman from the UK was a visiting artist, had a fellowship, and she came to Salem Artworks, and she built a porch that she traveled around rural New York with and had conversations with people. And I was sitting in the audience listening to this really cool project, and there were a few other Saranac Lakers in the audience. Sandra Hildreth was there, and Sharon was there. And afterwards, we all found each other, and we said, we need to have this. Like, it was just like a total, you know, if anybody deserves to have a porch that you can bring around and talk to people with, it's Saranac Lake. So we were captivated by this project. And so I went down to Salem Artworks. So here I am, don't look too closely because that's like 7 years ago and I probably look a lot younger. So I went down and met with these crazy artists and saw this crazy porch and talked to them. And that was sort of the first phase of trying to figure out if we could maybe do something like this in Saranac Lake. Luckily, we didn't do it then because we really weren't ready to do it then. We probably would have created something like what's behind us there, which probably is still sitting in a field somewhere, not being used and maybe falling apart. What we realized is that it's one thing to build something, it's another thing to use it, it's another thing to share it in the community. There's a lot of moving pieces to making something like this work. And so luckily we've spent some time figuring out some of those things. And we did a lot of research. So we applied for a first grant through the National Endowment for the Arts. We didn't get that grant because we weren't ready, and that was a good thing. And we went back then and we started sort of saying, well, what is it that's going to make this project work? What are other museums doing to use something like this? And we started really getting some ideas from other cool things that are being done in the United States. One is this project at the University of Pennsylvania. It's the Public History Truck. And this is a group of people in the Public History program who found a ice cream truck, repurposed it as a public history truck, and they go out into the community where there's history happening all over the place. Like, history doesn't just happen in our museum. It happens at the Fish and Game Club, where people know all sorts of history about hunting and fishing in Saranac Lake. It happens down at the Runabout Rendezvous, when people meet with their old boats and talk about guide boating. And so they use this truck to go out into the community and record people's stories and do little miniature exhibits. I loved this project. We also went to conferences, and we found out that we're not alone in wanting to get outside of our museum walls and take history to other people and get history and listen to history from other people. And so here are just some examples. There's like big fancy things. We don't want something like this because we would never be able to drive that through Saranac Lake. University of Iowa Mobile Museum, the Disability Rights Mobile Museum, Natural History Museum, and then this little one is super cool. This is in Mumbai, India, and it's an artist who came up with this little mobile thing. It's not motorized. You can, like, you know, it's like a rickshaw, and they take it into little communities and they do little miniature art exhibits of art that's created by the people there. I think that one's really neat. So we got some ideas. We figured out, you know, learned from other people, and we did another grant last year, and we got it from the National Endowment for the Arts. Very exciting, because that's like big time, and it's a small grant, but from an important place. So we got $15,000 from them to do the design and planning of the project, and that's what we've been doing all through 2017. That allowed us to hire, well, first we hired an architect, and then we moved on to a designer and an engineer. We went through a whole lot of planning. We hired a staff person, Aurora Wheeler, who was with us last year. And that helped us also start to develop some of the programming. Even though we don't have the porch yet, it helped us start to do some mini exhibits, develop our oral history project, and really get ready for using the porch. And here are some of the mini exhibits that we've been doing. So last year we did a little pop-up exhibit at the Winter Carnival Ice Palace. People got to create their own buttons, and kids really liked that, and share their memories of what's important to them about Winter Carnival. And then just recently at the Hotel Saranac, I love this. Raise your hand if you've gone to this yet. Yay, not just the hotel, but like to the phone booths. Okay, awesome. So we have a little mini exhibit going over there where you share your Hotel Saranac memories. We have to buy more magnets today because the cards are all up. It's so great. And I went over there. You have to keep going back because you learn stuff about friends of yours. Like I was looking at it and I realized that my friend Mark met his wife at the hotel for an occasion. Like it really is a way of connecting people. So that's like my favorite thing of all time, the phone booth. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to be able to do with the Cure Porch on Wheels. Whoops, put away. So we're also been developing our oral history project, which is a project we've been doing for a long time. The photo up top shows our current grant paid for a little bit of training with traditional arts of upstate New York, and they've been training oral history volunteers with us. And then this is just sort of gives you an idea of what we're thinking about. You know, the StoryCorps van with the NPR, that's what our traveling Cure Porch will be. It will be like our StoryCorps van. And so in the design process, we've been busy. We've gone through all sorts of ideas and tossed them out the window as these things go. Our first idea was, wouldn't it be cool to put a Cure Porch on a truck? Because then we could just go in, turn the key, and drive wherever we needed to go. We thought that was a really great idea until somebody said to us, in fact, it was Jill at Traditional Arts of Upstate New York, quite far away from here. She said, well, I want to use the porch. Who's going to bring it to me? And I thought, oh. Like, I'm going to have to drive it there and wait while she's using it. And insurance, all sorts of issues. Plus, it really doesn't look that much like a Cure Porch. We tried, and I showed it to Mary, and she kind of gave me, like, the evil eye. She's like, that doesn't look like. So we got away from that, and we ended up putting it on a trailer. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. Here's our team. This is taken just recently. This is... many of you probably know Don Rumble out in Bloomingdale. He's the perfect builder for this because he builds every year those huge things for home energy in the parade. So he knows how to build things that move down the road and don't fall apart. So we have the trailer and the handicap lift in his garage in Bloomingdale, and we're getting ready to build it. Melissa Klein is our designer. Wiley Levine is our engineer. And featured in our photo is our brand new coordinator of the project and the oral history project, Caitlin Gokenauer, who's here today with us. So this is her first day of working with us, so welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Caitlin's a local girl and a recent college graduate and just the right person for this project. We're so thrilled. So figuring out handicap accessibility was a big deal. It's a National Endowment for the Arts program, so the federal government won't give you money if you don't make it possible for everybody to use it, and that's important. We've actually figured it out. This is kind of the closest model of what we have right now. The handicap lift will go here on the back. You won't see it. There's French doors that open up, and then you can use that lift to get inside. But the main door is through here, and it's really glass all the way around. So, pretty exciting. So, in this past year, we've been raising money to do the next phase, which is to build it, and we just reached our goal. So we have the money in hand to build the porch. We have the trailer, we have the lift, and we're ready to go. We're still getting the design perfect, so we don't make any mistakes. But that's the good news, that we have the money to build it, and so rolling forward, that is not how we're going to be trailing our Cure Porch on wheels. But what we have to do now is build this thing, and we also are working on, well, with the funding that we got for this year, part of that was a $19,000 grant from the New York State Council on the Arts. So that's also, you know, a real vote of confidence, which is exciting. Foundation grants, private support, many of you have supported the Cure Porch on Wheels, so thank you. What's next is to build it, to develop programs. We submitted a National Endowment for the Arts Our Town grant, which is a bigger grant that we will find out about soon, that would support programming in 2019. And what's really important for us, I've talked about how, I mean, we know how important the Cure Porch is in terms of our history, how historic Saranac Lake will use this for exhibits and oral histories, but we really want to see it used throughout the community. We don't want this thing to just sit in our backyard, although when it does, that'll be kind of cool too at the museum. But we want people to use it for, as a mobile artist studio, as a place for outdoor concerts. It could be a puppet theater for a kids show. Here are some of the possible partners, and these are all groups that we've talked to that are excited to use it. Adirondack Architectural Heritage, the Carousel, and sometimes just as an outreach booth, if you want a visibility, if the horse show is going on in Lake Placid and Saranac Lake kind of wants to go over there and say, hey, guess what everybody, we're here. We have this symbol of our community that we can bring to places. Adirondack Correctional Facility, we've talked to the library there about doing an oral history project with them and bringing our booth in. I'm really excited about that. Adirondack Center for Writing, Adirondack North Country Association, Blue Seed Studios, Cycle Adirondacks, Harrietstown Housing Authority. So one of the cool things about the New York State, the New York and the National Endowment for the Arts is that they really encourage culture organization, arts and culture organizations to partner with public projects to improve communities as a whole, not just to be sort of a fun project for the wealthier part of your community, but to serve everybody in the community. So partnering with the Harrietstown Housing Authority, when they have a community day, we can roll in the Cure Porch on Wheels, and it can be a place for them to share their oral histories and be a part of that. Loon Lake Live Concert Series, North Country Public Radio is going to use it as a what do they do? Radio booth, right? Studio. Paul Smith's Visitor Interpretive Center, Pendragon Theater, part of Outdoor Theater Productions, Saranac Lake Free Library. It could be like a bookmobile. Somebody at the library said they were interested in using it. Saranac Lake Public Schools, we do a lot of school outreach, and this will be our way of showing up at the schools and doing projects with them, and Traditional Arts of Upstate New York as a artisan booth and some of the arts and artisan booths that they do. So lots of possibilities. And that's my last slide. I invite you all to join us on the porch, and since it isn't built yet, you really can't do that. But we're really eager to hear other people's ideas of how it can be used, ideas about the design, questions about the design and different partners. We're interested in hearing all of that. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand today or find me at another time. Find us at the museum if you haven't been there, just around the corner on Church Street. So that's the end of my thing. Any questions for me and Mary? I'm sorry?
When do you expect it to be put together?
Created early summer, late spring, early summer. Yep, Don Rumble wants to build it before he gets bogged down in the rest of his projects. So yeah, it should be soon, and we'll stay stay tuned on our website and stuff. We'll be putting up photos and things.
Do all the windows open?
They're gonna be sliding windows, sort of like typical slider windows. So here, like 2 of these 4 will slide. Two of the 4 will be stationary and then 2 will slide.